Of course, you can make your own decision about whether or not to invest in solar energy companies, but former heavyweight boxing champion Evander Holyfield is taking alternative energy investing to a new level. You may have heard about this. Holyfield has signed a joint venture with a Georgia energy company to build a solar farm on his property outside Atlanta. According to the New York Post, Holyfield plans to sell the electric power to his neighbors and others for profit. The 47-year-old Holyfield has already foreclosed twice on his estate. His advisors are hoping this energy project can be profitable enough so that Holyfield can stop boxing. He's currently planning a November 8th exhibition match in South Korea with an opponent still to be determined. And as we've been reporting to you, both the Senate and House are working on legislation designed to cut U.S. carbon emissions. What impact could these pending bills have on the alternative energy industry? Theodore O'Neill, an analyst at Kaufman Brothers, joins us now with his assessment. Theo, welcome.
Thank you.
Let me ask your opinion on Mr. Holyfield and his idea to make some extra cash. Is it a good one?
It's a good one if someone donates those panels to him.
How much do those panels cost?
It's about $8 a watt for installed costs. And that would work out to about 50 cents a kilowatt hour, which is a lot higher than what it costs for electricity where he lives.
How much of a time commitment is that? I mean, can an average person do this?
Once it's installed, it works on its own. It doesn't need any attention.
Okay, but in terms of like the investment to actually sell this energy to your neighbors?
Yes, you would have to put together a purchase power agreement with the electric utility, and they would take the power.
Gotcha. All right, so the story here, the Senate looking for a 20% reduction in greenhouse gas emission through 2020. The House looking for a 17% cut in 15 years. What's a realistic goal for this climate legislation?
Well, it was Climate Week in New York City last week, and I attended a number of different panels talking about the legislation, and it looks like there's so much entrenched partisanship on either side of this that I don't see anything likely to pass this year or next.
No kind of emission reduction? Nothing?
It doesn't look like we're close to a compromise on where that's going to go yet. Certainly not this year. Next year is a mid-election year. The longer this drags out, the less likely it seems we'll have legislation. So I think that the alternative energy stocks are going to have to, they'll have to go on their own merits.
What does that mean exactly? Which alternative energy industries perhaps stand to benefit from this gridlock in the climate legislation you're describing?
Well, I think you need to look at the stocks on an individual basis on what's happening within that industry, because there won't be any subsidies, there won't be any extra forces at work to make one particular sector more attractive than others.
So let's do that. Let's start with solar.
So if we look at the solar space, the cost of the raw material for making the most common kind of solar cells has fallen very close to zero. And that has made the cost for panels a lot cheaper. We should see that as being good for the consumer for next year. It won't be particularly good for the companies that are in that space, because the commoditization of solar cells is going to make it a very difficult business to make a profit in.
You have a sell rating on First Solar.
Yes, I do. Right. As a commodity business, which is where I see this going, they stand the most at risk. They have 50% gross profit margins, and I see those going down into the teens before it's all over.
Hybrid cars, electric cars.
Right. Well, this is something the U.S. government's put a lot of money into the entire food chain for hybrid cars, from the batteries all the way to the car makers. And while we wouldn't say that the U.S. government is deciding which companies are winners in this, certainly the ones that do get money from the DOE and grants or loans are much better positioned than other companies in the space. Such as, well, in the battery space, we like Ener1, the ticker is HEV, and its chief rival, A123, just went public last week, had a terrific IPO, and so there's a lot of interest in that space.
Okay, and my colleague who covers commodities, Michael Whitney, said to me, hey, ask about nuclear energy. It's green, it just gives off steam, right? Yet the environmentalists don't like it. What is your take on the nuclear sector?
The nuclear sector, I think there's a lot of talk about, and from investors, about acceptance of this, but Main Street hasn't gotten there yet.
Why not?
Well, I don't think we've been able to articulate the advantages relative to the climate concerns. Once we get a carbon bill passed, once it finally happens and we start counting the carbon emissions, it'll become very clear at that point what the advantage of nuclear is. But until then, it's sort of a political football.
Which companies are going to get hurt most by these permits they're going to have to, the government-issued emissions permits that you were just referring to, like an ExxonMobil?
The companies that emit the greatest amount of carbon would be the coal companies, the coal-fired power plants.
Okay, so we'll have
it's
to keep.
a big negative for them, and it's a positive for nuclear once that legislation is passed.
So what's it going to take overall for alternative energy sources to break out, become our main source of energy?
Alternative energy sources will never become our main source of energy. Nuclear is going to have to pick up the ball once we start dialing back on the coal.
All right. Theodore O'Neill, an analyst and alternative energy analyst. Many thanks for your time and your insight today.
Thank you.